Um, have you have you been put off? Are you frustrated by what is happening in the political sphere in this country at the moment? And do you think that 30 years was long enough for all of the kinks to have been worked out of the chain or out of the armor?
Thank you, Chaz. I've had messages here to stick to the script. From my missus called me now from Durban. I've got people in all over South Africa. Very good friends in various parts of the country. 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
30 years later. If I look at me as a person, what do I say? My worry is the youth, the future. My worry is the challenges facing women, the vulnerable, children. I don't want to say weak because I took a bit of flack the other day for calling women weak. So when I say vulnerable, I talk about the vulnerability, not in the sense of what they earn, not in the sense of what they own, but in the sense of the society we live in, which is very patriarchal, and is very very aggressive society.
Yes.
Particularly against women.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 3 daughters, so I say these things because I need to understand. I got 7 granddaughters, and it worries me that 30 years later, one would have thought that democracy would have brought what was termed under the Mandela publicity propaganda machine program just before 1994 was a better life.
Yes.
And I think if we look back then and we look at now, do we have a better life? The answer is no.
What constitutes a better life?
Well, I think the perception of a better life then was in comparison to.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that,
Yes.
and it made logical sense. But 30 years later, it doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Because the better life then was there'd be no more Group Areas Act, there'd be no more Mixed Marriages Act, there'd be no more discriminatory law, racial law, there'd be no job reservation, there'd be no restriction. You could now live on the beach, which we couldn't do in the old days. You could jump in first class. We couldn't because we were second class or deemed to be third class.
Or we had no class at all.
And we were literally sort of dispensed to the dump.
Okay.
So comparatively, yes, better life in comparison to the previous life. But if we talk about 30 years later, we're sitting in a situation where people can't afford to buy basic food.
People can't afford to buy bread.
We quite correct. We're sitting in a situation where, let me just rephrase something, which a lot of people may not know. So I don't want to use the word don't know, may not know.
Mm-hmm.
Inflation is a tax.
Yes.
So in other words, inflation, and this is, any economist will tell you that inflation is a tax because it's taking away from the value of your money.
Mm-hmm.
Our problem under this government is that we came in with, let me rephrase it. Mandela came in with a program, Thabo came in with a program. Thabo's program, of all the lot, had the most benefits. Because he saw South Africa as a developmental state. Zuma came in and made it a socialist state, not in its entirety, but it had drippings of socialism. Ramaphosa, sadly, is a bit of a mishmash because there's a lot of good things about him in terms of his style, but there's a lot of bad things. Now, let me give you an example. Ramaphosa has this concept that in order for an economy to grow, and remember in economy or in economics, there's two types of economic models. One is a Keynesian, and the other one is, just slipped my mind now. But anyway, I'll come back to it. We've adopted more the Keynesian, which is very much that what drives the state is infrastructure spend.
Okay.
So when you see the roads being redeveloped, bridges being done, money put in housing, driven by public sector as opposed to the private sector, you end up with a model where if government fails, everything fails.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example, and this is where they went wrong. Just a few weeks ago, Cyril Ramaphosa was cutting a ribbon at a company called Tetra Pak. Tetra Pak make all these little bottles for milk, like paper bottles.
Yes.
They're square. That's why they're called Tetra. Tetra means square.
Square.
And the concept there was that Tetra Pak had spent 500 million rand to put a new plant in, etc., etc. The question that needs to be asked, and Mondi put a few hundred million, and Sappi put a few hundred million, and Sasol put a few hundred million, did that trickle to people on the ground? And the answer is no. Okay. Why? So, and this is where these guys have actually missed the mark. Is that they might be doing the right things on certain deliverables, but it's not cascading.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. I read an article. It's a very critical issue. I read an article today in the Business Day. Today. And it said that South Africa is the second biggest citrus exporter or producer of citrus in the world. Second biggest. 16.35 or 16.5 million cartons. You know the cartons where you put the oranges in?
Yeah, yeah.
Forget about the grapes. We're talking oranges.
Yeah.
Forget about the apples. We're only talking about 16.5 million. Who makes that? No black supplier.
Sure.
None. So my point is, 30 years later, we're still being driven by white business.
Okay.
We're still being driven by a ideological concept, which, whether it's a quasi concept, in other words, whether it's not socialist, maybe it's not Marxist, maybe we must call it Africanist, all right? Because nothing is happening for black people. Nothing. Black people are walking the street. When I say black, I'm talking about colored, Indian, and African. It's actually a nice acronym. It's called CIA. Google it. Just put the SA at the end. But be that as it may. Colored, Indian, and African are taking off the crumbs. You know, the Bible talks about kings sitting on the table and the proletariat. You have the old French bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Proletariat means the working class.
Yeah.
We don't even have working class under this government.
Considering that we have such high unemployment rates.
I mean, colored people, 38%. African people, 42%. And those are the only ones that we can count.
Yes.
Because as you and I know, even Stats South Africa, or what the Afrikaner calls Census South Africa, we don't even count properly. Because I know for a fact when they did the last census, they never come to my house.
No, they didn't go to many houses.
Exactly. So we might even be sitting with 65 million.
Yeah.
And they say we're sitting at 62. And the problem or the reason and the rationale for that is that we did a few things.
Mm-hmm.
We did a few things wrong. One of them is under the Zuma government. Under the Zuma government, we introduced a thing called, Zuma stood up in Parliament